Most people don't know how to shop for goods and services here in the United States. If you need to buy something important, you don't look for the cheapest thing and hope everything else will work out. That would be crazy. But most people, when they're shopping for manufacturing, that's exactly what they do. They shop for the lowest price and they just hope it's all going to work out. Now, when it's really important, price is only one variable to consider. Imagine this. Picture yourself in desperate need of a root canal. You don't go to Donnie's Discount Dental with a coupon. Or imagine you're on trial for a murder you didn't commit. You don't shop around and select the cheapest attorney who will take the case. There's no telling the unforeseen consequences that can come from a decision like that. When your very life is on the line, price is only one variable to consider, and it may not even be the most important one. When it comes to your very existence, you need to be very diligent about selecting the people who are going to help you out. But far too often I see people selecting their vendors based off price alone. Even in cases where the very existence of the company is on the line, they jump straight for the lowest bidder. I'm not really sure where people learn this. Maybe they pick it up in business school, or they just have no idea what they're doing. Possibly, price is the only thing that they know how to evaluate, and they do it by just dropping it into a spreadsheet. But for many companies, the people who are making those buying decisions, they're trained to prioritize price above almost everything else. And while you might have been able to get away with that over the last 30 years, those days are quickly slipping away. We are living in really interesting times where the things that used to be true, dependable facts are changing. Now, as a great leader of your company, you keep up on these changes. You go out there and inform yourself. And I know this is true because you're listening to this content. But keep in mind that the people who work under you may not be keeping up on things quite the way you are. And this has proven to be very expensive for some organizations. Take, for example, Melvin Capital Management, who in 2020 decided to make some investments. They knew they were 100% right. They knew they would just do things the way they've always done, and it would all work out. And then they lost $6.8 billion by betting against GameStop and the internet at large. This resulted in them closing their doors forever in 2022. In April of 2023, Alyssa Heinerscheid and her marketing team knew that they were doing the right thing. All of her college training and all of her experience told her that this marketing campaign was going to be a smashing success. And then her brand, Bud Light, the best-selling brand in America, lost 30% market share and cost the company $395 million. Now, there's a lot of different takeaways you could have from this, but the primary takeaway you, as a leader of your company, should have is that things are changing, and things are changing fast. Things that were dependable and reliable in the past can ultimately cost your entire company everything they have. So what can we learn from this? Well, I guess the main takeaway is that we can no longer blindly trust that our people have the training to be able to navigate this complicated world. What was once solid and dependable training has now become a liability, and what was routine and easy to delegate has suddenly become something that has caused devastating catastrophes. And no one saw this coming. Of course, how could they have? Each of these is an early example, all victims of a rapidly changing world. But they are also victims of their own training and hubris. They confidently ran out there and made strong decisions based upon a world which no longer exists. But with the benefit of hindsight, we can make better decisions. We can learn from their examples. Primarily, you need to be very careful when making decisions based on historic data. And we need to be very careful that our people are not making decisions based on data from the past. They were trained in the old way, and chances are their decisions are not going to be as safe as they once were. Let's talk turkey about product pricing for a minute. This is how I've seen this go thousands of times before. A prospective customer, let's call them XYZ Company, has a great idea for a new product. Let's say a blender that plays La Cucaracha while it blends. And so they start spending money on things like market research and marketing, intellectual property protection like patents and copyrights. And then a couple years down the road, they decide, we're really serious about making this dream into reality. So they find a company like Central Custom Molding, and they bring us their concept and ask for a quotation. So in their head, they have some kind of concept of how much money they have to throw at this pesky problem of manufacturing to turn their grand vision into reality. And of course, the manufacturing cost from all the potential vendors is a lot more than they had anticipated. Or worse, there's some bottom feeder out there who just throws them a price that's way lower than anybody else, hoping that they can just get their hooks into XYZ company, knowing that they're probably going to milk them for a couple extra $100,000 down the road. But ultimately, the Lakucha blender is doomed from the start because it fails to offer a sufficient value proposition to the customer. In other words, there aren't enough people out there who are willing to pay the price it's going to take to justify all the cost it takes to develop it. And with the global market dynamic shifting, this has become more and more prevalent. With the contraction of globalization in general, people have really started to have to change how they think about sourcing, as compared to how it's been over the last 30 years. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, of course, this is all very basic business information. Why are we talking about this? I bring it up for two specific reasons. One, you'd be surprised how many people forget about the basics. And number two, globalization is contracting. Most people aren't really paying attention to that, but if you're aware of it, it gives you a competitive edge over your competition. Now, with China involved, and considering they weren't really interested in making any money, it created products that would not have been created in other economic environments that were really based on solid math. And so you get a bunch of really interesting novelty products like, Billy Bass or this thing that really don't make a lot of sense. Their value proposition isn't that great, and so under normal circumstances, they wouldn't have been created. It's fine that they were created, but it's also really important to understand that the world that allowed those things to be created is changing, and you don't want to be caught off guard. So this is a really good time to think about how we're creating products and what products we choose to create. Now, if you find yourself in a situation where your customers are unwilling to pay what it costs, that's a problem you can't shop around anymore. It simply means that products like that won't exist. We no longer live in a world where you can create a product idea and just shop it around hoping you'll find someone who's going to take a loss on it. Those days are gone. You need to take your manufacturing right up to the beginning of the process because those costs are more than they ever have been, and they're only going up. You can no longer think of manufacturing as an afterthought and just hope you can shop your way out of the problem. Your partnership with your manufacturing group is now a critically important piece of your business planning and a very important strategic vendor to your entire company. When you go out to get a quotation, your goal is to find how much it's going to cost to manufacture your product. Sounds like a simple endeavor, but it's actually quite complicated. You have all of these other variables that we've talked about, and then you have this fun new dynamic of sales strategy. The basic idea is how to trick you into giving your money to this vendor versus that vendor. And there's a number of methodologies that are used. The first strategy is desperation. Basically, in this concept, the company that you're talking to is probably behind on their bills. Maybe they owe their material vendors a lot of money, and they're willing to take any project at any price. So, sometimes your people will select them as your vendor. I don't have to tell you how strategically vulnerable you are with a vendor who is behind on their bills. Secondly, we have the ever-popular bait-and-switch strategy. This is probably the most readily utilized strategy out there, so when you're shopping for vendors, you need to be extra careful that you're not selecting one of these companies by accident. If you're delegating this to part of your team, you need to be particularly careful, because buyers and sourcing managers tend to fall for this pretty easily. After all, the price is less than this other vendor. This is the obvious choice. When in fact, you know, it's going to bite you in the butt. As you know, moving from one vendor to another is costly and quite the pain in the neck. And if you're working on a tooling project, it can be even more difficult. There's a lot of vendors out there who know this, and they use that as a weapon to exploit more money out of you down the road. In this strategy, you're going to end up paying a lot more for your project. In fact, people tend to pay through the nose until either A, they're fed up and they finally pull the project, or B, they go out of business. We've taken a lot of these projects in, and oftentimes the companies can't quite make it because they spent all of their money on their former vendor. Now keep in mind the companies that use this strategy have honed their crafts well. They are experts at extracting money from people like you. They keep you balanced on this verge of hope, optimism, and big cash expenditures. And it's easy for companies to do this because if you or your buyers are using the vendor selection method that is most popular, and that is to shop based off of price, you're an easy mark. All they have to do is be a little bit less than the other guys, and they've got your business. They've got you trapped. And I can't tell you the number of customers I've worked with who came to us after escaping this sort of abusive relationship with their previous vendor. Unfortunately, a lot of them had so much money extracted from them that they were not able to continue with their projects. And the ones that could still paid an awful price. Number 3, you have the bribery method. Now this sales strategy is very similar to bait and switch, except a key member of your team, a buyer or a supply chain manager perhaps, gets a kickback from your vendor. Now this encourages them to stick with vendors who have constant problems and delay, because every time you have to pay to solve a problem, they also get money in their pocket. Now unfortunately, I've seen this happen a lot as well. Typically, this sort of situation continues until either A, you catch them, which is actually a lot harder to do than you might think, or B, your company makes a major shift, canceling that program, canceling the product, eliminating this vendor core entirely. Some sort of major shift is generally when this sort of thing gets shut down. And then you have sales strategy number 4, the straightforward pricing strategy. This is the method that we use. Now in this method, we collect information from you and your team to build a quotation. Now on paper, the price you have to pay per part is probably going to be a little higher than the other scenarios. However, it's an honest number. We're not going to have every variable up front. That's impossible to do. So when we have to guess, we are going to round up and give you worst case scenario. We're going to give you prices that could be a little bit higher than the price you will actually pay. This is important for your budgetary purposes and strategic planning. By choosing to quote with this method, we know we're not going to land every contract. And to be quite honest, we don't want to land every contract. We're not interested in working with companies who are constantly looking for a better price, or companies who make very poor strategic decisions. We've been very successful by focusing on companies who look upon us for our manufacturing expertise and truly see us as a strategic partner. When you select a manufacturing vendor, you truly are selecting a strategic partner. And we feel it's very important to start that relationship off on the right foot, with truth and honesty. And part pricing is a fantastic place to start that conversation. Now again, the economic landscape is changing and it's hard to keep up. In the past, companies were able to make a lot of money because countries like China were subsidizing the manufacturing cost. And that left you enough margin to be able to make mistakes and still run a profit. However, as you're transitioning to the United States, you're going to have thinner margins and you are not going to be able to make the same mistakes that were made before. You've got to be very conscious that every move you make is the proper one. Now when it comes to buying and selecting your next strategic vendors, don't continue to do the same thing your team has already done. This is far too dynamic of a time to just follow the lead. You, as a buyer of your company, stand to gain a lot from thinking outside of the box. Well, that's all I've got for you today. But make sure you come back and check out the channel later because we're working on some really cool things. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can get all our latest content. And remember, go out there and do something cool today.